Olá, sou o Miguel Falcão, de Coimbra, Portugal. Estão a ouvir o Yes Music Podcast.
Okay, it's great to be able to talk to John Kirkman. Now, if you don't know John, you really should. He's a friend of the band and has travelled with them extensively. Introduced them many times, including on the Cruise to the Edge. He's a rock journalist, a DJ, and author of one of the most remarkable books about Yes, Time and a Word, The Yes Interviews. But he's back now with a new version of that iconic work called Yes Dialogues. Hello, John.
Hi, how are you?
Very well, thank you.
Okay, so hi, John. Nice to be speaking with you.
Hi, Mark.
So I'd just like to ask you, first off, what are some of your earliest Yes memories, and how did you discover the band?
Oh, well, that's actually quite a well-known story. I was about 14, and in the UK, there was a television program called The Old Grey Whistle Test. And one week they had a special in concert, and that was Yes Live from the Rainbow. And that's when I first got into them. It's quite strange, really, because my mother came in while I was watching it, and she said, "Oh, that's Yes." And that impressed me straight away that my mum knew who Yes was. My first live experience with Yes was on the Tales from Topographic Oceans tour. And I can remember, bear in mind I was 15 at the time, and I remember telling Chris Squire this, and he thought it was quite funny. But I said, well, I got there having seen Yes at the Rainbow and expecting more of the same, not realising that there was going to be a new album. And unfortunately, in the UK at the time, for some reason, there was a problem. The album hadn't been released. So the early part of the tour, you couldn't get to hear the album. So we didn't really know what we were going to get. Well, they came on, they did Close to the Edge, and then John said, we're going to play some new music from our new album. And they proceeded to play the whole of Topographic Oceans from start to finish, which is great, except that around about sort of halfway through, I started thinking, when are you going to play something I know? And I told this to Steve Howe and to Chris Squire many years later, and they thought that was quite funny. But I said, you have to understand that being a 15-year-old, I was quite impatient. But I said, it was a great experience, nevertheless.
Yeah. Another thing I was going to ask you about is you've already done a interview book on Yes, and now there's going to be a new version. What is the difference this time around?
Well, we have a lot more interviews in it. We have an interview with Trevor Horn, which was done only in May of this year, and Trevor talks about his time with the band during Drama and also his production work during 90125 and, of course, during Big Generator, and more recently when he got up and actually sang with the band. He sang with the band live in the UK, in Oxford, and at the Royal Albert Hall. And the Oxford and Royal Albert Hall concerts were actually recorded. So I'm presuming at some point they will see the light of day. But yeah, there's also interviews with Billy Sherwood, one of the final interviews with Chris Squire as well. I mean, the original book came out in September 2013, which means the cut-off point for that was the early part of 2013, probably the time of the first Cruise to the Edge. So there's been a lot more interviews been done since then and a bit more information out there. So, and we've also got a new design by Roger Dean. Originally, the Union album was called Dialogue, and he did some artwork for it, but of course then they changed their mind and they wanted to call it Union. So he still had the artwork, and he suggested using that for the artwork for the book. It's also an official Yes book now as well, so it's fully authorised.
Well, that's absolutely fascinating hearing about the artwork there, and it does look beautiful from the photographs I've seen of it.
It is great. It's fantastic, and nobody's seen it. Nobody has seen it before because obviously Roger didn't use it because they didn't use the title Dialogue. And it was him that suggested using it, and I said, great, okay, and that's how it came about. And inside we've got some drawings of the original Dialogue sort of logo. But also, Roger and I are going to be signing copies, limited copies of the artwork for a poster, so people will be able to buy that, and it's going to be limited. But it will be signed by both Roger and myself.
That's brilliant. So there are lots of Yes books already, of course. Some like Yes Stories by Tim Morse and The Time and a Word, a Yes Story by Martin Popoff, for example, do have excerpts from interviews. What do you think makes your interviews special and therefore this book special?
Well, these interviews, because I know the band, are all very, very honest. And I was surprised how honest they were at times. There's been literally very little left out. There were a few things left out which we agreed on with the members. I mean, we're talking just a couple of points because we didn't really want to put certain things into the public domain.
Yeah.
But everywhere else, it's very, very honest. And as Chris Squire said to me, he said, well, it's good because it's actually Yes telling their story in their own words. And these are full interviews as well. These are not just excerpts from interviews. These are full interviews.
Right. And how did you get these interviews? You've obviously built up a great friendship with all the members of Yes over the years. But how did that grow?
I just asked them. That was it. It was as simple as that. I said, look, I'm going to do it. I already had some that I'd done over the years for radio and some video things and stuff that I'd worked on. I'd had contact. I mean, I was the executive producer of the Union Live DVD CD set that came out. I was the executive producer for the record label that did that originally. I worked with a lot of the guys on lots of different projects over the years, videos, box sets, DVDs, all sorts of things. And they were all very, very open to doing it, all of them. So that's why we were able to do it. I mean, with the last one we did was with Trevor Horn, and he said, I can't understand why you've not been able to get in touch with me. But he said, yeah, I'm happy to do it. So I went round to Trevor's house and recorded a couple of hours worth of stuff there. And as you know, the last recording that he worked on with them was Fly From Here. And it's in the book, so I think I can probably tell you that Trevor has re-recorded all the lead vocals for that album. And I asked him if it's coming out, and he said, yeah, probably next year. So that would then make Fly From Here the second album from the drama lineup.
Oh, right. That's a bit of an exclusive, isn't it? Yes, that's amazing.
Well, it's in the book, so people who buy the book are going to read it. So,
yes, of course.
And I have heard it, and it's great. It really is very, very good.
So what was that something that came from him? Was that his idea?
I don't know, to be honest with you, but he'd done it. And he said, well, I re-recorded all the vocals for Fly From Here. I said, really? And he said, yeah, do you want to hear it? I went, yeah. And it's great. And I said, so Ben Moire's not right. He said, no, Ben Moire is still on it. But he said, I just thought as a project it'd be nice to do. And I think they're possibly going to do that next year. But he went through lots of various things with regard to, both recording drama and also recording Fly From Here. And he did say that quite a few of the songs were actually going to be on the follow-up to drama. He'd already written some of these songs as the follow-up. And as you know, Fly From Here was written before the drama album.
Yes.
But he'd written some stuff. And he said, when I came to do 90125, he said it was a much better follow-up to drama than Fly From Here would have been at the time. Right. So that's just his opinion, of course. And the great thing about the opinions in all the books is, again, as Chris Squire told me, he said, well, yeah, we do kind of differ on opinion sometimes. But he said that's going to happen because people see things differently to the way other people see them. So he said, I think that's quite natural and it's quite good. He said, I haven't seen anything in the book that I'm thinking, really? He said, it's just one of those things. Well, that's the way you think it, and this is the way I see it,
Yeah. Now, was there anyone, you've spoken to many, many Yes Men for the book, which is fantastic. Was there anyone you would have liked to have interviewed but didn't manage to?
We didn't interview Igor. I've got to be honest. There was a very, very big problem trying to get hold of Igor. I don't know what the situation is with him. As you know, he left the band.
Yes.
And you probably know why he left the band.
Yeah.
But I said to Chris Squire, I said, how do I get in touch with him? And he said, well, it'd probably be better if you didn't. So that was that, really. But we have spoken to other people as well. We spoke to, for instance, the guy who took the photos for the Yes album, which was Yes's first big hit, a guy called Phil Franks.
Yeah.
And he took me right the way through the process, the entire process. The actual original cover for the Yes album was going to be a back photo shoot of an amplifier which said Yes, Fragile on the back, but they couldn't get the lights to work at the studio where they'd set up the amps. So they went round to Phil Franks's flat and did the photo in the kitchen, and he used infrared film. So there's a lot of great detail in there, and of course, then we've done a few interviews with Roger Dean about various things,
yes,
and how he came to join working for Yes. He was told that by Phil Carson, well, I work with two bands, Led Zeppelin and Yes, and he said Led Zeppelin aren't doing anything at the moment, but Yes, why don't you go down to Advision and talk to them? So he said that's how the Fragile thing came about.
Wonderful. What about some other people? What about managers? Ever talked to Yes managers?
I mean, I know the managers, but again, it's like the managers tend not to want to speak.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's probably another reason I mean, the band have been very, very forthright, not on the managers necessarily, but just generally the way things have gone, the interpersonal relationships. And I think there's a lot of people who are going to be out there interested in what the managers have to say, but then there's a lot of people who probably aren't interested. It is a book about yes, not about the management. I mean, management is management. No matter who you're sort of working for or managing, it's pretty much the same thing throughout the world. I've worked with some of the biggest rock bands in the world, and I've worked with, lots of bands like The Who and Deep Purple and Rainbow and Asia and all these other bands as well over the years. And the management is, the management situation is pretty much the same. Of course, there's a personal aspect be brought into that because each manager brings his own personality to how he manages the band. And yes, I've had quite a few managers, but I didn't really see the need to actually interview any of the managers. And that's why there's nobody in there from the managers. I think from the creative side, I think we've got that covered with Roger Dean and also with Phil Franks.
Yeah, great.
Yes are touring in Japan at the moment, and ARW are also on tour. So it's kind of a great time if you're into Yes music. What do you think?
Absolutely.
What do you think of the current state of Yes, and how did you react to ARW finally getting together?
When I spoke to Trevor Rabin, it was about a year or so ago, he said, John, I've got to be honest, I'm going to stop talking about this until it happens. But he said, it will happen. But he said, we just all got to sync up our sort of time together and when we can do it. And I think that's what's happened. I mean, John went off and did the Anderson Ponte Band, which was great. And Trevor was doing film soundtracks, and Rick, of course, was doing his solo stuff. He did a couple of big shows in the UK last year. And I think it was going to happen. It was always going to be on the card. Of course, you get the fan base who are going to be divided. I can't actually understand why they are divided because for me, it's almost a cake and eat it situation. Well, on the one hand, you've got Yes, and then on the other hand, you've got Anderson, Rabin, Wakeman. Well, what's not to like? It's crazy. I mean, I've always been very, very pro Yes. Whoever is in the band, Yes, now, that's Yes. But I still wholeheartedly 100% support all the guys who've ever been in Yes. It's an incredible family of musicians. The amazing amount of talent that has been part of that band is just incredible. And I don't see the need to get into this is better than that or that's better than that. And when people go on about the original band, I mean, a lot of people say this about Yes. No, the original band is the best band. And it's like, what they mean is the classic lineup. In other words, the lineup that made Close to the Edge. And that's pretty much it. Maybe Fragile. Yeah. Okay. Close to the Edge and Fragile. But really, that's not the original lineup. The original lineup, of course, included Peter Banks and Tony Kaye. And that's been changing since April 1970 when Peter was sacked. And then less than a year later when Tony was sacked. So the whole thing about Yes is that it's evolving, and they are still evolving now. I mean, the current lineup, which also has Jay Shell, it's great to see Alan's back in the band playing the encores with the band, but you have to bear in mind the man's had surgery. So it's, again, Yes are finished. They're not finished. Yes are not finished by a long chalk. I mean, it's been said a number of times. People have been saying Yes are finished since, Bill Bruford left. Yes. And it's gone on. It's an ever ongoing story that is still being written. And I think personally, having worked with the band on their last UK tour and saw them at the Royal Albert Hall, I think this lineup of Yes is potentially one of the best lineups. And that's not a criticism of any of the other lineups either.
No.
They're all very, very, very good. And they all bring something to the table. There has never, ever been a passenger in Yes. They've all been there for a reason, and they've all brought something to the band. And I think that's good. I mean, let's face it, these orchestras, these great orchestras throughout the world, none of them have the original members in there, do they? But they still go out and perform.
Absolutely right, yes. One thing I wanted to ask you about was the rumours of albums next year. Now, we've heard a rumour of an ARW, more than one EP or something like that, and the rumour mill is absolutely in overdrive at the moment about a new Yes album. Whether or not you know anything about it, would that be something you would be interested in? New music from both bands?
Yeah, of course. Well, I can tell you that they are considering an album. We're talking about Yes. There is, of course, potentially the Fly From Here version that could come out. But, of course, and there is some material. I know there are 2 songs that Chris Squire is on. Now, I'm not sure entirely what kind of a finished state they are in. If they are in a finished state and it can be worked on, then maybe they might see the light of day. I'm not sure. Again, I don't know. I spoke to Jeff Downes about it because one of the songs is a song that Jeff and John Davison wrote. with Chris's participation for the last album. But again, we don't know. It depends. I mean, you see a lot of these albums come out. I mean, for me, it started with the Jimi Hendrix albums many years ago, where they overdubbed new musicians onto it. And of course, the Beatles famously did it with John Lennon. I don't see there a problem. If there's anything there that can be used and it can be done with integrity, I'm sure they can use it and probably will. I think they should. Whether that happens or not, I don't know. With regard to the Anderson, Rabin, Wakeman, I think they want to get out there and get a feel for the audiences. I'm sure they have material. I mean, those guys, you don't just stop writing material when you're a musician of those guys' caliber. You're writing all the time, and then you bring something, well, hey, this is what I've got. What do you think? And, of course, we already know, because Trevor told me, and I think it's pretty open secret, that they were actually sending material backwards and forwards to each other over about 2 years ago. So I do think there will be an album. There may be some tracks ahead of that, but I do think there'll be an album. But I think they need to get this touring situation out of the way, and then they can look at it. I mean, recording an album, as Yes found with the last album, takes slightly longer than you can sometimes have. I mean, they were really pushed for Heaven and Earth, which is why Billy Sherwood came in to remix it. And they just didn't really have enough time to finish it. They'd done a lot of prep beforehand, which they found to be very, very advantageous. A lot of the material was already routined and worked out before they went into the studio with Roy Thomas Vega. But again, even so, they were being pushed because they needed a tour. And I think you find that with a lot of bands. But the last album from Yes, Heaven and Earth, was their biggest selling album since Union, which is all good.
Absolutely right, yes. Well, we certainly look forward to that. And thank you very much indeed for speaking to us today. But before you go, how can people get hold of the book?
Well, we've got a Facebook page, and it's under it's under Time and a Word, the Yes interviews, but the book is called Dialogue. You can go to the website, which is stereo33books.com. Now, it's stereo and then the number 33 rather than written 33. So it's stereo33books.com. And you can order the book there now. And the first 500, I think, are actually signed by me. And we're also going to have copies on Cruise to the Edge as well. But it's going to be a lot more expensive on Cruise to the Edge. So if you want to buy it now, while you can on the initial sales period, it's almost half the price it's going to be on Cruise to the Edge. So you're advised to buy it now. Don't do my sales bit here, but it is going to be available on Cruise to the Edge. And as I've already been asked by a lot of people, do you think the band will sign it? Yes, I do think the band will sign it on Cruise to the Edge, and I also think Roger will sign it. I will certainly be up for signing it if people present me with the book. That's not a problem. But I hope people do enjoy the book. As I said, it is Yes in their own words. And there's a lot of myths that have been busted in that particular book as well, particularly around the time of the Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, Howe and Union period. There's a lot of stories that went around which, it's like anything now, and even more so with the internet, that, that you kind of gain credence and people seem to think, well, it's written down, it must be true, and it's not. So there you go. You get to read the truth in a lot of the interviews in this book.
Fantastic. Well, I can't wait to have a look at it myself, and thank you again very much indeed, John, for joining us on the Yes Music podcast today.
Thanks, John.
Kevin, my pleasure. I love what you guys do, and long may it continue.
Thank you. All right, after speaking to John, Mark is still with me, so we'll have a quick chat about some of those fascinating things that we learned from John in that short interview. And the first thing that I was interested by was the fact that this book is an official Yes book, and I'm not sure that